They called it the Golden Age, but gold tarnishes. Behind those perfect smiles, behind the studio-approved legends, something else lived, something hungry, something violent, something Hollywood spent millions to bury. You think you know these faces, you don't. What if the most beloved leading men were predators? What if the studios knew everything? What if the police were on payroll, the coroners compromised, the journalists silenced? This is not gossip. This is documented history. In the next 30 minutes, you will meet men whose faces defined American masculinity. You will see what they tried to burn. You will hear testimonies that were bought into silence. The camera lies, the obituaries lied, but the bodies don't lie. The broken people left behind don't lie. Welcome to the shadow side of the Golden Age. Rock Hudson, he was the perfect man. Rock Hudson, with his towering frame and gentle eyes, represented an ideal so complete it seemed almost artificial. Because it was, for 30 years, Rock Hudson was Hollywood's most bankable leading man, romancing Doris Day, commanding screens with effortless masculinity. Women wanted him, men wanted to be him, and none of them knew he was gay. This is not an expose of homosexuality. This is an expose of what the closet cost, and who profited from maintaining it. His father abandoned the family during the Depression. His stepfather was abusive. Young Roy learned early to hide, to adapt, to become whatever was needed. When agent Henry Wilson discovered him, the transformation began. Wilson specialized in manufacturing masculine stars, often by finding gay men and forcing them into heterosexual performance. The names he created tell the story: Rock Hudson, Tab Hunter, Troy Donahue. Names like geological formations, names that overcompensated. Wilson extracted a price for his services. Multiple clients later described sexual coercion as part of his management style. Hudson's relationship with Wilson was complex: mentor, manager, and alleged exploiter. Universal Studios knew Hudson was gay from early in his career. They monitored his relationships. They threatened him when he became careless. And in 1955, they arranged his marriage to Phyllis Gates, Wilson's secretary, to quash growing rumors. Gates later claimed she had not known Hudson was gay when she married him. The marriage lasted 3 years. She spent the rest of her life insisting she had been deceived. But the studio knew. The agent knew. The publicists knew. Everyone knew except the woman walking down the aisle. The machinery of closeting was precise and merciless. Hudson was permitted discreet relationships as long as they remained invisible. When they threatened to become visible, studio fixers intervened. Journalist Rona Barrett was allegedly paid to suppress stories. Photographers were bought off. Sometimes when money failed, threats succeeded. Hudson lived this double life for decades. The psychological toll was immense. He drank heavily. He engaged in increasingly risky behavior. He compartmentalized so completely that friends described knowing to different people the public Rock and the private Roy. In 1984, Rock Hudson was diagnosed with AIDS. He was among the first major public figures to contract the disease in the American epidemic. He kept the diagnosis secret for as long as possible. He continued working. He kissed Linda Evans on Dynasty without disclosing his condition, a decision that became controversial when his illness was revealed. When Hudson finally acknowledged his AIDS diagnosis in July 1985, it was global news. He became, overnight, the most famous AIDS patient in the world. His announcement changed public perception of the disease. Suddenly, AIDS was not an abstraction affecting anonymous populations. It had a face America knew. Hudson died 3 months later, in October 1985. He was 59 years old. He was praised for his courage in going public. And that courage was real. But the tragedy was not that Rock Hudson died of AIDS. The tragedy was that Rock Hudson was never permitted to live openly. The studio that profited from his performance of heterosexuality abandoned him in illness. The system that demanded he lie spent decades enforcing that lie. The industry that celebrated his romance with Doris Day had manufactured every frame of it. Rock Hudson did not choose the closet. The closet was chosen for him, and the price of exit was career. Paid for Hollywood's cowardice with his authenticity. And he paid for the era's homophobia with his life. For the perfect man was a performance. Errol Flynn, The Devil in Tyche. was the most beautiful man in Hollywood. When Errol Flynn appeared on screen, audiences surrendered completely. The smile, effortless. The sword work, impeccable. Warner Brothers marketed him as heroism incarnate, Robin Hood, Captain Blood, the swashbuckler who always rescued the maiden. But here's what the studio never put in press releases. By 35, Flynn had been tried for statutory rape twice. He kept a collection of underage girls he called his jailbait. He filmed sexual encounters without consent decades before such acts had legal names. And when he died at 50, his body was so ravaged that the coroner remarked he had organs of a man twice his age. Flynn was born in Tasmania in 1909 to emotionally barren parents. By adolescence, he'd been expelled from nearly every school for fighting, stealing, and what administrators called moral failures with staff members' daughters. He drifted through New Guinea, allegedly killed a man, contracted multiple diseases before ever seeing a film camera. His psychiatrist later described him as a textbook narcissist with sociopathic tendencies masked by extraordinary charm. Hollywood didn't create Errol Flynn, but Hollywood gave him unlimited access. Every film set became a hunting ground. He installed two-way mirrors in his home. He drugged drinks. He selected girls deliberately for their youth and vulnerability. His drinking wasn't recreational, it was medicinal. Vodka by noon, mixed with opiates by evening. In 1942, to teenage girls accused Flynn of rape. Betty Hansen, 17. Peggy Satterlee, 15. Their stories were strikingly similar: alcohol, isolation, coercion aboard his yacht. Warner Brothers deployed its full publicity machine, not to find truth, but to destroy the accusers. Hansen's past relationships were paraded before the jury. Satterlee was painted as a gold digger. Flynn was acquitted. But a third accuser existed, a girl whose testimony was suppressed before trial. Studio lawyers paid her family for silence. The phrase "and like Flynn" entered American lexicon after the verdict, celebrating his escape as proof of charm, not evidence of a broken system. After acquittal, his behavior escalated. In his autobiography, he bragged openly about seducing a 15-year-old. He laughed about it in print. No charges, no consequences, only book sales. Beverly Odland was 15 when she became Flynn's final companion. Her mother facilitated the relationship. Odland later described their 2 years together as a nightmare of drugs and violence. "He hit me when he was drunk," she recalled, which was always. On October 14, 1959, Flynn arrived in Vancouver to sell his yacht. That evening, he complained of back pain. He went to lie down. He never got up. The autopsy revealed advanced cirrhosis, heart disease, hepatitis, kidney degeneration, and evidence of long-term opiate abuse. Beverly Odland, then 17, was in the next room when he died. Today, Flynn's films still air on classic movie channels. His image still sells posters. But the girls he used have names too. Most lived with their experiences in silence. Some didn't live at all. Errol Flynn died a legend. But legends like gold tarnish. Clark Gable, the king's silence. They called him the king of Hollywood. Clark Gable. For 2 decades, he was the definition of American masculinity: rough-hewn, charming, dominant. Rhett Butler's sneer, the gambler's grin. MGM built an empire on his jaw, but empires require sacrifices. He left behind a daughter he never acknowledged for decades. He left behind a dead wife whose death he may have caused. And he left behind secrets so carefully guarded that even now, 60 years after his death, the full truth remains locked in studio vaults. Gable was born in 1901 in Ohio to a father who considered acting effeminate. When his mother died before his first birthday, he was raised by relatives, then reclaimed by his father and stepmother. He spent his entire life trying to prove his masculinity to his father, to Hollywood, to himself. He married older women who could advance his career. He hunted obsessively. He refused any role he deemed soft. His first wife transformed him from an awkward oil field worker into a polished performer. He left her the moment he no longer needed her. His second wife financed his early Hollywood years. He divorced her when Carole Lombard entered his life. Lombard was different. She matched him, challenged him, and then she died, On January 16, 1942, Carol Lombard boarded a flight in Indianapolis after a war bond tour. She was rushing home to confront Gable about rumors of his affair with Lana Turner. The plane struck Mount Potosi near Las Vegas. All aboard were killed. Gable was devastated. But here's what's rarely discussed: he was responsible for the affair that sent Carol rushing home. And there's more. In 1935, actress Loretta Young became pregnant after working with Gable on The Call of the Wild. Near the end of her life, Young claimed what happened with Gable was not consensual. She called it rape. Louis B. Mayer orchestrated the cover-up. Young was sent away. The pregnancy was hidden. The baby, Judy Lewis, was born in secret and then publicly adopted by Young, a fiction requiring constant maintenance. Judy Lewis grew up not knowing Clark Gable was her father. She didn't learn until she was 31. When Gable killed a pedestrian in a drunk driving accident in 1933, the studio made it disappear. The victim was a woman. The police report was altered. A studio employee claimed to be driving. When Loretta Young became pregnant, Mayer personally supervised the cover-up, not out of morality, but mathematics. Gable was too valuable to risk. Judy Lewis wrote a memoir in 1994 describing growing up with a mother who could never explain her origins. "I always knew something was wrong," she wrote. "I just didn't know the wrongness had a name." Clark Gable died on November 16, 1960, 11 days after a massive heart attack. His fifth wife was pregnant when he died. He never met his only acknowledged son. They buried the king. They did not bury his secrets. Marlon Brando, The Method's madness changed everything. When Marlon Brando appeared in A Streetcar Named Desire, acting itself seemed to fracture and reform around him. The mumbling, the magnetism, the danger. He was called a genius, a revolutionary, the greatest actor of his generation. But genius has costs, and Marlon Brando spent his life making others pay them. His personal life was wreckage: abandoned children, destroyed relationships, psychological manipulation, and descent into isolation so complete that by the end, he had become a hermit in his own compound, obese, paranoid, surrounded by ghosts. This is not the story of a brilliant man who happened to be troubled. This is the story of a troubled man who used brilliance as permission. Brando was born in 1924 in Omaha to an alcoholic father who beat him and an alcoholic mother who could not protect him. Young Marlon often retrieved his mother from bars, guided her home, put her to bed. He learned early that love was unreliable, that trust was weakness. These lessons calcified into armor. Brando fathered at least 11 children with multiple women. He married 3 times, conducted countless affairs, and left behind custody disputes and children who barely knew him. His relationships followed a pattern: intense pursuit, rapid conquest, complete emotional withdrawal. And a cash fee. His first wife described their marriage as psychological warfare. She accused him of manipulation, cruelty, and using their son Christian as a weapon. Tarita Terapaya was 19 when they met on Mutiny on the Bounty. He brought her to Hollywood, impregnated her, then abandoned her to raise their children in Tahiti while he continued unchanged. On May 16, 1990, Christian Brando shot and killed Dag Drolet, boyfriend of Christian's half-sister Cheyenne. Christian claimed the shooting was accidental, a struggle over a gun. What emerged was a portrait of a family so dysfunctional it defied comprehension. Christian had been raised in crossfire of his parents' hatred. He witnessed violence. He experienced neglect. He developed substance problems Marlon ignored for years. Cheyenne struggled with mental illness most of her life. After Drolet's death, she refused to testify. She returned to Tahiti and was hospitalized repeatedly. In 1995, she hanged herself. She was 25. Christian served 5 years. After release, he drifted, struggling with addiction, run-ins with law, the weight of his father's name. He died in 2008 of pneumonia. He was 40-9. 2 children, both destroyed. One father, the same father who accepted Oscars, celebrated as an artist of unprecedented sensitivity. Where was that sensitivity at home? Director Bertolucci later admitted that a scene in Last Tango in Paris involving sexual assault was orchestrated without co-star Maria Schneider's full consent. Brando participated. Schneider said she felt raped by the experience. "I should have called my lawyer," she said years later, "but I was 19, and they were gods." Brando never addressed her accusations. The film remained celebrated. Her trauma remained too. Brando spent his final years on his private island and in his Los Angeles compound, bloated, isolated, paranoid. He weighed over 300 pounds. He refused visitors. He died July 1, 2004, of pulmonary fibrosis. He was 80. His estate was legal disaster. Children he barely acknowledged emerged with claims. Disputes dragged on for years. The man who revolutionized acting left behind no peace. Only wreckage. Watch The Godfather today and you see genius. But genius is not goodness. Marlon Brando demanded authenticity from his performances, but he offered no such authenticity. To people who loved him, he gave them abandonment, chaos, the privilege of being adjacent to greatness and the punishment of being unimportant. To it, the greatest actor of his generation, the worst father, the cruelest partner, the man who proved, definitively, that talent and decency have nothing to do with each other. John Wayne, the Patriots' private war, the Duke, America itself in human form. For 50 years, John Wayne was not merely an actor but a symbol of courage, of strength, of everything the nation wanted to believe about itself. He won wars on screen. He tamed the West. He stood tall when standing tall was all that seemed to matter. But the man behind the myth was smaller than his shadow, and darker. Marion Robert Morrison was born in 1907 in Winterset, Iowa, to a father who failed at everything and a mother who never let him forget it. Young Marion was caught between them, too sensitive for his father's approval, too male for his mother's affection. He learned to perform masculinity because he never felt he owned it naturally. By the time Hollywood renamed him John Wayne, the performance had become permanent. But performances require maintenance. And Wayne maintained his with alcohol, with rage, and with a political extremism that alienated colleagues and destroyed friendships. Here is what the John Wayne legend omits. He never served in World War II. While contemporaries like Jimmy Stewart and Clark Gable enlisted, Wayne obtained deferments. He made war films while others fought actual wars, and he spent the rest of his life compensating for this guilt. With increasingly aggressive patriotism, his treatment of women was systematic degradation. His 3 wives all described similar patterns: charm during courtship, control during marriage, contempt by the end. Tyler Wayne, his 3rd wife, wrote of his jealous rages, his drinking, his need to diminish anyone who threatened his dominance. On set, he was a tyrant. Directors who challenged him were enemies. Actors who outperformed him were problems to be solved. He used his physical size as intimidation and his star power as a weapon. During the House Un-American Activities Committee hearings, Wayne became an enthusiastic participant in the blacklist. He helped destroy careers. He named names. He called those who refused to cooperate traitors. Carl Foreman, screenwriter of High Noon, was driven from Hollywood partly through Wayne's efforts. Foreman later recalled Wayne threatening him directly, suggesting that uncooperative writers might face consequences beyond unemployment. This was not patriotism. This was persecution dressed in flags. Wayne's racism was documented and unrepentant. In a 1971 Playboy interview, he stated openly that he believed in white supremacy until black people were educated to a point of responsibility. He defended the genocide of Native Americans as necessary. These were not slips. These were convictions, and yet the industry celebrated him. The government honored him. He received the Congressional Gold Medal and the Presidential Medal of Freedom. He has an airport named after him. His final years were spent battling cancer, the result of filming The Conqueror downwind from nuclear test sites, a production that killed nearly half its principal cast and crew over time. He faced death with the stoicism his characters had displayed. But stoicism is not virtue, and courage on screen is not courage in life. John Wayne died in 1979, and America mourned a symbol. But symbols are not people, and the person behind this one was a bully, a coward in the war that defined his generation, and a willing destroyer of lives that did not conform to his narrow vision of America. The Duke rode into many sunsets, but some of the people he trampled never saw the sun again. Charlie Chaplin, the tramp's dark appetite. He was the little tramp, the beloved vagabond, the poet of silent cinema who made the world laugh and weep with nothing but movement and expression. Charlie Chaplin was arguably the first global superstar. His face was recognized on every continent. His films transcended language. His genius was undeniable, so was his predation. Charles Spencer Chaplin was born in 1889 in London. Two music hall performers whose careers collapsed into poverty and madness. His mother was institutionalized repeatedly. His father drank himself to death. Young Charlie knew workhouses, hunger, and the constant threat of dissolution. He escaped through performance, but he carried the damage with him. What emerged in Hollywood was a pattern so consistent it cannot be called coincidence. Charlie Chaplin pursued teenage girls with systematic determination. Mildred Harris was 16 when she became pregnant by Chaplin. He was 29. They married to avoid scandal. The marriage lasted 2 years. Lita Gray was 15 when Chaplin began pursuing her. She had appeared in his films as a child. He waited until she was barely past childhood to begin a sexual relationship. When she became pregnant at 16, they married in Mexico to avoid statutory rape charges. The marriage was a nightmare. Her divorce filing described sexual demands she called degrading and constant psychological cruelty. Paulette Goddard was in her early 20s when she became Chaplin's third wife, practically elderly by his standards. Una O'Neill was 18 when she married the 54-year-old Chaplin. He was 36 years her senior. By all accounts, this marriage was functional, even loving. But the pattern that preceded it was not love. It was hunting. Chaplin's studio, which he owned, was a perfect hunting ground. Young actresses arrived seeking opportunity. Some left with contracts, some left with trauma. Joan Barry's case became public in 1943. She accused Chaplin of fathering her child and brought a paternity suit against him. Blood tests proved he was not the father, but California law at the time did not accept blood evidence as conclusive. Chaplin was ordered to pay child support for a child science proved was not his. The trial exposed his methods. Barry described how Chaplin had pursued her, installed her in an apartment, demanded sexual compliance, then discarded her when she became inconvenient. She was 22 when they met. He was 53. J. Edgar Hoover had been monitoring Chaplin for years, viewing him as a communist sympathizer. The Barry scandal gave Hoover ammunition. The FBI compiled a file thousands of pages thick. When Chaplin left America for a film premiere in 1952, Hoover arranged for his re-entry permit to be revoked. Charlie Chaplin, the little tramp who had symbolized America's embrace of the underdog, was effectively exiled. He did not return for 20 years. The exile was politically motivated, unfair, and vindictive. But it was also a consequence of decades of behavior that had generated enemies and left behind damaged women whose stories were finally becoming harder to suppress. Chaplin spent his remaining years in Switzerland receiving honors, writing his autobiography which mentioned his young wives only briefly, and never apologized for anything. He died in 1977, laden with awards, praised as a master. But the teenage girls who passed through his life were not abstractions. They were children by modern standards, and by the standards of his time, they were still too young. Genius does not require predation. Art does not require victims. Charlie Chaplin proved only that the world will forgive a monster if his films are beautiful. Enough The Tramp made us laugh, but some of his stories were never meant to be comedies.